Welcome to Human Monsters. This episode was adapted from the memoir Out of the Shadows by Timea Nagy. April 27th, 1998, Budapest, Hungary. Timea Nagy was on a plane. Destination, Toronto. She had grown up in a communist country, and this was her first experience in the West. The woman seated next to her, also a Hungarian national, said, "Is London your final destination, or are you going somewhere else?" "I'm going to Toronto." It was almost surreal to Timea that she would say that. 3 weeks ago, she could barely distinguish between the United States and Canada, and now she was about to embark on a journey to the largest North American nation and its largest city. The woman said, "Me too. I live in Toronto. It's a great city." The woman looked around before making her next point, as if there were hidden microphones or undercover cops keeping tabs on her. She said, "Are you traveling alone?" "No, I'm with a friend." Timea indicated the presence of her friend Bianca, who was sitting a few rows back. The woman was puzzled. She said, "That's your friend?" She was likely reacting that way because Bianca was all dolled up, while Timea's appearance was more casual and subdued. The woman said, "What are you going to do in Toronto?" The woman came across as suspicious, as did Timea's family and friends, which was endlessly vexing to Timea. In fact, she and Bianca booked seats apart from each other because of the judgmental reactions from others. Timea told the woman, "We're with an agency. We're going to be babysitters." The agency that hired the two girls also provided jobs for Hungarian girls in such positions as housekeepers and nightclub dancers. Timea was far too modest to be a scantily clad dancer. Bianca chose dancing. She was a free spirit and much wilder than Timea. The woman looked concerned. She said, "You've got to be careful. Do you know where you're going exactly? What part of the city are you staying in?" Timea resented the inquisition and tyrannical undertones of the woman's maternal approach, unsolicited as it was. Timea was 21 years old and resented the notion that she couldn't take care of herself and that she was so naive she wouldn't be able to orient herself in a safe and productive direction. Still, Timea couldn't answer these questions. All she could come up with was, "Well, I don't have the exact address." "You're going to Canada and you don't know where you're going to sleep? Which agency are you with?" Timea was still drawing a blank. She was interviewed for the agency by a woman named Natasha in a McDonald's. Somehow, perhaps due to the limited life experience, she failed to see how sketchy that circumstance was. A representative of an employment agency for au pair girls and strippers didn't even have an office, just arranging for interviews at McDonald's. She was given a contract to sign and a plane ticket the day before the flight. This operation didn't pussyfoot around. The contract was written in English, and Timea was not fluent in the language, so Natasha translated it for her. For all Timea knew, it could have been a car lease agreement. Annoyed that the woman was characterizing her as a rube with no sense of how the world works, Timea said, "Look, it's a Hungarian agency, so there's nothing to worry about. They're helping their own people. Thank you so much for your interest." With that, Timea turned away and took a nap. Though she was relieved to be rid of that woman's invasive questions, she did address some serious issues worth looking into, and Timea began to worry that she had made a mistake in signing up with that agency. However, she reassured herself that everything was going to be okay. An hour later, Timea woke from a nap, and the woman put a slip of paper in her hand. Timea said, "What's this?" "My address and phone number, just in case." Timea thanked her and mimed the paper into her pocket when, in fact, she let it drift between the seats. Throughout the rest of her flight, Timea considered the possibilities of what awaited her in Canada. Even though Natasha, the recruiter, had told Bianca and me that Canadian winter was over by April, as we flew through the clouds over the Atlantic, I imagined a beautiful frozen landscape of evergreen trees and groups of fun-loving young people wearing sweaters and smiles, waiting for me in the distance below. Something like what I'd seen watching the 1988 Winter Olympics in a city called Calgary. Was it close to Toronto? I knew so little about the country I would call home for 3 months. Would I feel like a Canadian in that time? Would I learn English? I was most anxious about not speaking a word of the language, but I reassured myself with what Natasha had told me. There were many nice Hungarian-Canadian families that needed babysitters, so I would mostly be speaking Hungarian. Maybe the children I'd be caring for could help me learn the basics of English until I had time to take a real class. She had incurred some debts and took the position in Toronto so she could make enough money to bring herself out of the red and be of assistance to her mother. As she put it, "It hurt to remember my dad's absence, so as the plane began its descent toward Toronto, I pushed the pain down and imagined reconnecting with him one day. He would be so proud of his daughter, who went to Canada, learned English, and made a lot of money. He would never know about the debt I'd gotten into in the last year, and I would forgive him for leaving me. We could start over. And if my plan worked, Mom would never have to know about my troubles either. I would soon be in Canada, where I would fix everything. Maybe she and I could start over too." Timea described her first impressions of Toronto. "Everything in Toronto was different than in Hungary, starting with the smell. It was fresh, clean, and cool. It smelled young. Bianca and I smiled at each other as we walked up the gangway into the airport terminal, but we didn't say a word. We just took it all in, following the crowd and the signs depicting a person in a uniform, looking for that word Natasha had written down in the little journal I'd bought for my trip: immigration. Timea described key events from her sexual history. I'd had a few negative sexual experiences over the years, beginning one night when I was 12. A group of kids from our building was gathered together on couches in the common room, watching a movie. Sitting next to me was the uncle of one of my friends. During the movie, he fondled me under the blanket, reaching his hands into my pants. I'd been shocked and confused, not knowing what was happening or how to stop it. When it was over, I felt ashamed. I didn't tell anyone, not even my mother, the police officer. What would I say? I must have invited the man's attention, though I didn't know how. I shut the experience out of my mind and prayed it would never happen again. I saw him a few times after that and always managed to avoid him. Then, a couple of years ago, when I was 17 and working late at the TV station, one of the guys working there found me alone in the studio and tried to force himself on me. I'd been saved by a phone ringing and he'd left. Again, I didn't tell anyone. I was too embarrassed. So I tried to forget, tried to imagine that it had happened to someone else, a different Timea. Yet another time, one of my mom's colleagues made some unwanted advances while I waited for her to finish her shift, and I had to push him off me. With Adam, despite our other problems, intimacy was respectful and was a connection we enjoyed. I couldn't imagine having sex with someone for money, like Bianca did. She described the desperate financial situation she was in before leaving for Canada. Zoe and I were 6 months behind on our rent and other household bills, and we would fight over the last piece of bread. There was no money in independent movie makers, and I owed a lot of money to the friend at the TV station who I'd borrowed from. One day, an eviction warning arrived at the apartment, giving us 30 days to pay the rent we owed. I was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. As Timea passed through customs in Toronto's Pearson International Airport, she reflected on her interview with Natasha. She had said that work visas for dancers were the easiest kind to get, but I'd said that I didn't want to be a dancer of any kind. She'd tried hard to convince me to change my mind. You can have your pick of jobs, Timea, but dancing pays the best. What exactly do you mean by dancing? I'd asked, curious but not interested. I was picturing the sleazy nightclubs I'd driven past in the not-so-nice areas of Budapest. The kind with the neon signs advertising hot girls, where even someone as naive as me knew there was more than just dancing going on. It's nothing like you think, Natasha explained. In Canada, you just walk around in your bikini and guys put money in the straps. Have you seen the movie Striptease with Demi Moore? It's like that, but not stripping, just teasing. She laughed at her own little joke, and I smiled. I had seen that movie, and it wasn't that bad, but I still knew dancing wasn't for me. Bianca had wanted to know more. Maybe I could do that in Canada. Is it really that easy? Sure, fill out an application, Natasha said, smiling warmly. For Bianca, it was a much better choice than her real line of work. Let's get back to the other work, I told Natasha. I prefer babysitting, with cleaning as my second choice. She nodded. Then I asked a question I'd had since seeing the ad. Why isn't English necessary? Well, Natasha explained, there is a big Hungarian community in Toronto. If you need a dentist, you go to a Hungarian dentist. If you need a doctor, you go to a Hungarian doctor. There are even Hungarian grocery stores and shops. Toronto is very multicultural, and there is a neighborhood for every country. I had to admit it sounded good, but how will we get around, I asked. Easy, Natasha said. Our agency has drivers, so you don't have to use public transit. How much money do you actually make, and how long does it take? Bianca inquired. We both needed to do the math. How much do you need? Natasha asked. At least as much as I make in Sweden, Bianca said, and then shared the amount. Natasha nodded and then turned to me. What's your situation, Timea? I explained that Zoe and I had fallen far behind on our rent and other bills, and that I had a business debt as well. I needed about 500,000 forint, which Natasha said was 3,500 Canadian. Well, with babysitting, you make about $500 a month per kid, and out of that, you have to pay us an agency fee. So that would leave you about $400 per month if you were taking care of one child. But if you look after 2 or 3 kids, it can really add up. I began calculating the numbers in my head for a family of 3 or 4 children. It was a sizable amount. Maybe I'd found a solution to my problems. Then Natasha laid out the math for dancing, which added up to 3 times as much. But I'm not interested in dancing, I reiterated. My mom is a police officer here, and she would kill me. She understood. In Canada, you can do whatever you want. You try babysitting, and if you need a little extra money on a Friday night, you can always try dancing. But it's up to you. When you get to Canada, our agency picks you up and takes you to your accommodation, and then we look at all the jobs that are available and pick the best match. When she next saw her boyfriend Adam, she explained her plans to him. When he learned that Bianca was involved, he immediately disapproved. He said, "She's going to get you into trouble." "You're just jealous. Why can't you just be happy for me? I'm doing what I have to do." It appeared that a breakup was imminent. He even said, "Are you breaking up with me?" She wanted to reassure him, saying, "It's just for 3 months. It could be good for us." He still wasn't sold on the idea. Timea was interrogated for 6 hours by a customs official who spoke Hungarian. He kept asking her if she was going to become a stripper for a guy named Tony Verudi. Timea hadn't heard of him and, as previously stated, had no intentions of becoming an exotic dancer. It's not what her contract spelled out in English. The customs officer said, "This contract says that you will be working here as an exotic dancer, with Tony Verudi as your agent. You will pay him $140 per week, and you will be employed at Temptations, a strip club not far from here, and you'll be making $20 a song." Timea was shocked. She said, "What?" The customs officer turned the document around and showed it to her. He said, "Is that your signature there?" "Yes, that's my signature, but the contract is in English and I don't speak English. The recruiter told me what the contract says, but what you just read isn't what she translated to me." "So you're not coming as a dancer?" "No." "Then I have no choice but to return you to Hungary for trying to enter Canada unlawfully. You cannot stay if you are not going to be a dancer, because what you have here is an application for an exotic dancing visa." After a pause, he said, "So, you don't want to be a dancer, right?" "That's right." "Okay, we will not charge you, but we will send you back to Hungary on the condition that you not try to re-enter Canada for 18 months. If you try to re-enter Canada, you will be criminally charged. Do you understand?" She answered to the affirmative. He said, "There's just one problem. There are no flights back to Hungary until tomorrow night. Your people from the agency are here waiting for you, so we're going to release you on the promise that you return to the airport at 3 p.m. tomorrow. We'll keep your passport here, and it will be returned to you once you board the aircraft." Timea described what happened later at baggage claim. "Our suitcases had long been removed from the carousel and placed by a wall with other unclaimed bags. After collecting them, we walked toward another set of doors where a guard checked to make sure they were ours, and then through automatic doors that opened into the terminal. That's when I saw him for the first time. The scary-looking man in the driver's license photo the officer had shown me. Tony Verruti. It was a name I'd heard over and over again for the last several hours, and here he was in the flesh, even more intimidating than in his photo. He stood about 20 feet away from us, arms crossed, unsmiling. He was tall, over 6 feet, and heavy-set, with a protruding stomach. His skin was pasty white, and his eyes small and dark. He was bald on top, but wore his hair in a long ponytail. Behind him were two guys speaking in Hungarian. I recognized one of them, Elek Pesci. I asked, scarcely believing my eyes. It was the Elek Pesci I knew. He recognized me, but didn't smile. Timea Nagy, it's been a long time. What are you doing here? I asked. Natasha is my girlfriend, he said. We both work for this agency. I was relieved to see a familiar face, but also confused. But you became a detective after the army, I said. Things changed, he said simply, without explanation. I thought I could detect regret in his voice, but I didn't press to find out what happened in Hungary. I got asked that later, if there was time, or assume he lost his job because of the failing economy, like my mom. Right now, I needed to reassure Bianca. I turned to her. It's good, everything's okay. I know him. The look on her face didn't change from anger to relief, as I'd hoped. She was still very mad at me. You guys fucked up bad, Alex said sternly. You must have said something wrong, because the immigration officer was all over us. It was supposed to be easy. We've had 12 girls come over in the last couple of months. Easy. He snapped his fingers to demonstrate how simple it had all been. What did you tell them? I was indignant. What do you mean? What did I tell them? They asked me what I came here to do, and I said babysitting. Alec and the other man looked exasperated at my answer and translated it to Tony, who evidently didn't understand Hungarian. He didn't look too pleased either. Alec sighed heavily. You have to get a dancing visa, otherwise you can't stay in the country. Getting you a babysitting job would have come after you entered the country. How the hell did you mess this up? No one explained this to me. Now I was the one who was angry. Well, Natasha should have explained it to you better in Budapest. You can only get into Canada on an exotic dancing visa. Once you're here, you can do whatever you want, but you can only get in on a dancer's work permit. He pointed to Tony. Tony is the manager who will sign your work permit. As crazy as all this was, it was starting to make sense again. There had been a miscommunication, and for whatever strange reason, Canada only let in exotic dancers, not babysitters. I felt horrible about my mistake and all the trouble I'd caused. By not lying at customs, I'd made a mess of everything. I'd come to Canada to fix my problems, and now I was in more trouble than ever. Alec picked up my bag, and the other Hungarian guy, who was introduced as Joseph, a driver, picked up Bianca's, and the five of us headed to the parking lot. Fear was rising, so I tried to push it down with wishful thinking. Maybe I would go to sleep and wake up to discover this was all just a bad dream. I would have breakfast, get dressed, and go to the agency office. There, I'd choose the best babysitting job, just like Natasha had promised. Bianca could dance, strip, or do whatever she wanted. All I cared about was that we were both making money and paying off our debts. But with no passports and orders to leave the country the following day. None of that seemed likely at all. The men took Timea and Bianca to a motel room, where Timea received another grilling. She recalls how it went down. Tony motioned for Bianca and me to sit down on the bed. "So, what now?" he asked, with Alec translating for him. I stared at him blankly. "How could you be so stupid?" he demanded. "What are you doing here anyway?" "I came to make money." My truthful answer sounded flimsy. On the heels of my airport interrogation, scared, hungry, and exhausted, nothing sounded like the truth anymore. I looked at Alec. "My mom moved out," I began, scrambling to explain my circumstances. "I know," Alex said. "You do?" I asked, confused. "How?" "What about the TV station?" he continued. He knew about that too? I didn't think I'd mentioned either of these points to Natasha. "I couldn't make enough money there," I explained, dumbfounded. Tony looked at me sternly, and then looked back at Alec, waiting for the translation. "I owe a lot of taxes, and I was going to lose my apartment," I continued, "so I came here to make the money to pay off my bills and keep my apartment. You know how the economy is in Hungary. Maybe that's why he'd moved to Canada." "Why did you come here?" I asked, turning the attention back to him. "I make so much more money here. This corporation, this agency, it's booming. We have girls working all over, and branches across Western Europe. I could never be this successful back in Hungary." He noticed Tony looking impatient, so he changed the subject back to me. "I'm really concerned now, Timea. You've put us in a really bad spot." He didn't direct any of his questions to Bianca. I seemed to be the target of blame. Why wasn't everyone mad at Natasha, the recruiter? "How?" I asked, genuinely confused. I was the one in the mess. "Well, Tony is the manager. He paid $1,500 at the airport to get you guys out. Our agency also paid for your plane tickets, which were $1,000 each, and this room for tonight. So right now, each of you owes us about $2,000. He glanced over at Bianca, who looked sick, but continued to speak mainly to me. "And we have a boss, Sasha. He's the agency owner, and we report to him. He's a Ukrainian guy. And you know Ukrainians, you don't mess with them." The way he said this gave me chills. "So I need to get the money to Sasha as soon as possible," he continued. "How much money do you have on you?" "Just a few thousand forint," I said, feeling really stupid, wishing I had more. "And the $150 Canadian that Natasha gave me for the work permit fee." I looked over to Bianca to see if she could help out. "Same here," she said, still avoiding eye contact with me. "Well then, we have a real problem." His words chilled me. "Not only do you owe us a lot of money, but you put our whole business at risk at the airport by calling attention to us. Now you're going to be sent back, which looks very bad for our reputation." Alec paused, glanced again at Bianca, and then returned his attention to me. "So, what are you going to do?" I didn't have a clue. All I could picture was the grand total of what I now owed, about $5,500, and how it would be impossible to pay back if I couldn't work in Canada like I'd planned. "I don't know," was my simple answer. I turned to Bianca to see if she had any ideas. "Well, I'm going back," she said angrily. "I'll go to my job in Sweden right away. It will take me longer than working here, but I can pay it back." I shuddered, thinking about her going back to what she'd been doing there. Okay, let's not panic, Alec's tone suddenly changed to reassurance. We're going to figure this out. Tamika, he said, calling me by a nickname no one had used for years. I'll take care of you, don't worry. Bianca, you'll figure it out. If you guys just want to freshen up a little, we'll take you to the place where we usually hang out at night, and you could work there for a few hours and make a bit of cash. Now, it won't be what you wanted, but you're in a tough spot. There are a lot of ways to make a lot of money quick. So you just get ready and we'll go. Where are we going? I asked. All I wanted to do was crawl into bed and wake up to a solution. Just shut up, Timea. Bianca spat out, finally addressing me. You've done enough already. Just do what they say. Hearing her words and tone filled me with hurt and shame. She was my friend, the closest thing I had to an older sister, and I'd let her down without intending to. I asked Alec if I could take a shower and put on clean clothes, but he said there wasn't time. We needed to get going to wherever he was taking us. I hoped we would be back soon so I could have an early night. I noticed the clock radio on the nightstand, and it read 7:30 p.m., which was 1:30 a.m. to me. I went to the bathroom and splashed some cold water on my face. 15 minutes later, the men, with Timea and Bianca in tow, pulled up at a building with no windows and a neon display of scantily clad women in tableau, dancing. Timea described the initial impressions she processed of this building through her senses. A knot began to form in my stomach, but I didn't have too much time to think before we were ushered in the door. A man dressed in a tuxedo stood at the top of a set of stairs leading down, and Tony said something to him in English. The guard nodded and motioned for us to go down the stairs. I'd never set foot in a place like this. What was I going to see? What was I going to do? I said a silent prayer that it would be cleaning toilets. Walking into the basement of the club, it was once again the smell that hit me first. I was reminded of my moldy childhood apartment, and I felt sick. It brought back a very bad feeling, but it was more than just mold. Beer-soaked carpet, cigarette smoke, cheap perfume, sweat, and fried food. It all smelled utterly filthy, in every aspect of the word. There was another dank smell, too, but I couldn't place it. I looked around in the dim light and saw a lot of young women, maybe 20 of them, in bikinis, walking around. Music was blaring. Several more were dancing on a stage at the front of the room, some naked. There was a bar along one side and a few men sitting at it, as well as at the tables around the room. I figured this must be the exotic dancing that Natasha had described and that Canada was apparently giving work permits for. Were they going to ask me to do this? The knot in my stomach tightened. Timea sat down at a table with Bianca, Tony, Joseph, and Alec. Joseph asked her if she wanted a drink. She said she wanted a Coca-Cola. Her father had been an alcoholic, and his example put her off the idea of drinking. He asked her if she wanted a line. She was dumbfounded. She wasn't up to speed on all the substance abuse parlance. He put a finger to his nostril. She made it clear she didn't do cocaine. She was a good girl, through and through. Alec teased her about that for a moment. Soon the humor drained out of his face. To quote Timea, "So what are you going to do?" Alec asked me again. I stared at him blankly. "Look around the room, Tamika," All these girls are making a ton of money just by dancing. That girl right there, he pointed to a girl in a bikini on the stage. She makes $300 or $400 a day. That's 50,000 forint. I looked at her and then back at him in disbelief. Just for dancing like that? I asked. She doesn't have to take her clothes off? I almost had to shout over the music. Well, she does have to take them off by the third song to make that kind of money. That's how it works. In that moment, I realized that exotic dancer was just a fancy term for stripper. You need to do that, Timea, Alex said. Joseph nodded in agreement, and Tony just looked me up and down, making me uncomfortable. It's the only way you're going to make any money, and you need to start now. You can't just sit here taking up space. He said the same thing to Bianca. She wasn't at all fazed. Joseph spoke up. You actually can't even be in a place like this without having a form signed. The police can come in at any time and ask for your papers, so you need to go with Tony to his office and fill out the form. Tony stood up and motioned for me to go with him and for Bianca to stay put. Didn't she need to fill out the form too? I looked at Alec and Joseph, who both nodded. Just go sign the papers, Timea, Alex said, and then come back and we'll make a plan to bring you guys back to Canada, because this is the only way you're going to make any real money. I trusted Alec. He was a comrade from home. I stood up and followed Tony. He led me past the bar, away from the music, smoke, and people, and into a dimly lit hallway. We walked past what looked like a change room for the dancers. A heavy scent of perfume wafted out, barely masking the smell of sweat and other bodily fluids. I almost gagged as we continued down the hall to a closed door. Tony opened it, and I entered a dark and messy room, his office. A large desk in the center was covered in paperwork, and behind it were piles of more paper and files. The walls were white but dirty, and a poster of a naked woman was the only decor. By the door was a clothing rack full of bikinis and shiny, sexy dancers' outfits, and underneath it, a row of high-heeled shoes in all sizes. Tony pointed to the clothing rack, and I understood I was to change into something else. Terrified, with dread in the pit of my stomach, I found the least revealing top and skirt I could and ducked behind the rack so I could hide from his eyes. I left my jeans and Pink Panther sweatshirt folded on the floor. Then Tony called me over to his desk. He pulled out an official-looking form and told me to write down my name, address, and phone number by pointing to the words and saying them over and over in English until I understood. As I wrote, I could smell his sweat. I could feel his small, close-set eyes on me. We call these fox eyes in Hungary. Never trust anyone with fox eyes, my mom always said. They are really sneaky. Tony sat down heavily in the big black leather chair at his desk and began sorting through some papers. I finished filling in the form and then handed it to him. He put his hand on my hand and patted it like I was a child. I wanted to yank my hand back, but I tried to smile politely instead. I didn't know what else to do. He was my new boss, and he'd just paid a giant fine at immigration for me. Maybe he could help me stay in Canada. I had to be nice to him. Maybe he was being nice too. But then he took my hand and pulled me close to him, bringing us face to face. I could see straight into his fox eyes. I immediately had flashbacks to the guy at the TV station and to the time my mom's colleague grabbed me while I waited for her to finish her shift. Those times, I'd been able to get away, but where could I run to now? I didn't know where I was, and I didn't know anyone here but Bianca, who wasn't even speaking to me. If I screamed, no one would hear me over the loud music. I couldn't move, so I silently began to pray. Please don't hurt me. Tony put his hand around my waist, and then moved it down over my butt. I didn't fight or try to move his hand. I didn't question. I didn't say anything. I just stood there, frozen. Then he stood up and pushed everything off his desk and onto the ground before reaching for my top and pulling it off over my head. He lifted up the miniskirt I just put on and took off my underwear, discarding them on the floor. He was sweating now and moaning, grinding against me. It was disgusting. He lifted me up and sat me on the desk. All I could do was hope that whatever was going to happen would be over quickly. Tony began kissing my face, ears, neck, and breasts, while breathing heavily and sweating like a pig. Then, without any warning, he shoved his finger in me. It hurt like hell. He pulled out his penis with his other hand and played with himself while still fingering me. His nail was sharp, and it scratched and cut into the walls of my vagina, like a knife going in and out. My thoughts were a cloud of confusing and conflicting ideas. Is he going to rape me? Is this how guys in Canada are? Does this mean he's my boyfriend? I had the crushing thought that I was cheating on Adam, and that if my mom ever found out about this, she would kill me. I hoped he'd washed his hands. I didn't want to get sick down there. I had to get to safety somehow. So I mentally and emotionally left my own body and floated to the other side of the room. Like a ghost. I'm not even sure how. I watched everything happen to me from that distance. I watched him kiss me on the forehead like I was a child. I watched myself stay utterly still on the desk, naked and vulnerable. I saw that I was in pain. Then, suddenly, I felt the pain, and I came back into my body as quickly as I'd left it. I didn't know what had happened, what to call it. Rape, as I understood it, was violent and mean, and other than the scratching, this hadn't been either of those things. Tony wasn't mean. He wasn't holding me down and calling me names and forcing sex. He was causing pain, yet it didn't seem like that was the point. He wasn't trying to hurt me. He was trying to satisfy himself. I didn't know what to think, so I began running through ideas in my head. Okay, this isn't rape. I don't think I'm cheating because I'm not kissing him back, and I don't want this to be happening. So, what is this? Did I invite it? He tried to kiss me on the mouth while still fingering me, and I turned my face away. I just wanted to stay frozen and emotionless, like a mannequin. He sped up his hand movements on himself, made a final loud groan, and then stopped. I could smell his semen and felt sick. Then I felt something was between my legs. At first, I thought I was somehow turned on by what had just happened, which made me feel even more confused and guilty. But then I looked down and saw a trickle of blood. That's how rough the scratching had been. What had I gotten myself into? My stomach shrank into a tight knot, and I started shaking and sweating. I wanted to cry, but I knew I couldn't fall apart. Not here, not now. Don't think about how bad this is. Just stand up and pretend everything is okay. Tony took out a clean pair of jeans from his drawer and slowly put them on. I was still sitting on the desk, not sure if I was allowed to get up. Then he lifted me off the desk and guided me a few steps toward the rack of clothing. I reached for my jeans and my sweatshirt, but he handed me the miniskirt, bikini top, and 6-inch stilettos he'd taken off me just minutes before, and some tissues to wipe off the blood. Then he handed me a plastic bag, gesturing that I should put my jeans and shirt in it. As I stuffed in my babysitter clothes, I stuffed in my Hungarian self, my upbringing, my values, my memories of summer camp, my ribbons and awards, my family name. I put on the stripper clothes and shoes and walked toward the office door, trying not to fall. I'd never worn heels this high. I'd barely worn heels at all. Tony playfully spanked my butt before pushing me out the door and back into the club. As Timea headed toward the main room of the club, girls working there knew instinctively, based on experience, what had just happened, but said and did nothing in reaction. She returned to the table where she and Alec and Yosef were sitting before. She hadn't been gone long, but she was completely transformed by what had just transpired, and was now a completely different person. Yosef wasn't exactly reassuring. As Timea put it, "I think Tony really likes you," Yosef said. "I think he wants to be your close friend." "What do you mean?" "You know. He'll take care of you. He can get you stuff you need. When you come back, he'll make sure you can work in Canada." I didn't feel comforted at all. "So you want to try the stage?" Alec asked. "You're all ready for it." He looked me up and down, approving my outfit. "No," I said, "I don't." "Look, Timea, the only way we can get you back into Canada is as a dancer. You heard what they said at immigration. Just give it a try, and we'll see what you can do. You can make a lot of money, pay us back quickly, and then we can look at the rest of your schedule and see what we can figure out." Alec's tone was light but serious. "Go talk to those girls over there, Sylvia and Adina. They work for our agency, too. They can show you what to do." I looked at the two girls in the corner. One was skinny and blonde, wearing a little bit of makeup, and looked about 25 or 6. The other looked much younger, even younger than me. She had a cute face, dark hair, and a knockout figure. They looked at me and smiled. "Just go and say hello, Timea," Alec was insistent, so I got up and walked over. The girls greeted me in Hungarian. They weren't rough and tough. They were friendly. "Good to meet you," Sylvia said. "We heard you had a rough time at the border. Glad you made it through." Word spread quickly in whatever world this was. "So you guys work for Alec?" I asked, trying to act normal, while images of what had just happened to me circled through my mind. I pushed them away as best as I could. "How's that going?" "Oh, good, good," they answered, almost in unison. "He's awesome. He really takes care of us." "Are there more girls or just you two?" I felt almost robotic, interviewing them like I was interviewing a band for my TV show. Talking would distract me from the pain between my legs. "There are lots of us," Sylvia began pointing out girls in the room. "One there, 2 there, a few more over there. There are also some at other clubs we go to." "Other clubs?" "Yeah, we switch around so it doesn't get boring," Adina explained. I took this all in, piece by jagged puzzle piece. "What about other jobs?" I asked. "Like babysitting. That's what I was supposed to do here." "Babysitting? Ha! Forget about that. All the money is in this work," Adina said. "How much do you want to make?" Sylvia asked. I explained my debts at home, plus the cost of my plane ticket. "You're going to make that much here in a week." "What do you have to do?" I asked. I was nervous, but I needed as much information as I could get. Come on, we'll show you. Adina and Sylvia walked me across the room and past the stage where a girl was dancing in a bikini, and then back down the hall toward Tony's office and into the change room I'd passed before. The air was even thicker with perfume inside than it was in the hallway. There were more racks of lingerie and bikinis, as well as some skimpy costumes and tons of high-heeled shoes. On one side of the room was a long table stacked with makeup and several aerosol cans of hair and body spray. In the corner was a pile of t-shirts and jeans, probably the clothes the girls came in. None of it was very organized, and the room was dirty. There was a small bathroom, which I couldn't really see into, but I figured it was probably dirty too. A few chairs were scattered around, and Sylvia and Adina pulled them together in a little triangle and told me to sit down, which I gratefully did. The stilettos hurt. If you want to make a lot of money, Adina said, the only way to do it is by dancing. How much do you make? I asked. You can make as much as you want, but you only have to work for a few hours to make $500. It's easy, she said. But what do you do? Sylvia began laying out the protocol. You choose 3 songs. The first one should have a fast beat, the second one slower, and the third one really slow, like a ballad. You stay dressed through most of the first song. You can wear whatever, a t-shirt and skirt, a costume, a bikini. I listened carefully, holding my breath and clasping my hands. I was cold, but my hands were sweaty. By the end of the first song, you take something off. During the second one, you take more off. And by the end of the third song, even if it's just in the last 5 seconds, you have to be completely naked. Completely naked? I asked. It's no big deal. Did you see how dark it is in the club? Adina dismissed my concerns. Besides, no one gives a damn about what's happening on the stage. That's not where the real money is made. I didn't want to ask what she meant, but I felt compelled. Where is the real money made? The VIP room. Come on, we'll show you. We'd only been sitting for a few minutes, and now we were on the move again, to somewhere I really didn't want to go. I didn't want to see what was going on wherever they were taking me. They led me back into the club through the tables where girls were sitting on guys' laps and toward a door that had a bright neon sign above it with the letters VIP. Red strobe lights flashed around the door frame. As I stepped through the threshold, I felt like I was entering one of the caves I'd been trained to get out of back in my summer camp days. My heart was pounding, and I tried to get my bearings and stay calm. The room was so dark, dank, and smoky that at first I could hardly see anything except for the bright bikinis illuminated by black lights. There were also towels, lots of white hand towels, glowing like the bikinis. The music was the same pop music blaring in the main club. As my eyes adjusted, I could see there were couches in the center of the room and restaurant-style booths around the perimeter, maybe 20 of them. In the booths, the girls were completely naked, performing hand jobs and oral sex. The men were clothed, but all of them had their pants open. This area is for private dancing, Sylvia explained in a loud whisper right in my ear. The music was so loud. To come in here, you pay the cashier $5 at the door. She'll give you a towel, and then you lead your client to a booth. He sits down, and you do a private dance just for him. It's simple. There's one rule: no touching. If an undercover cop comes in here and sees touching, he can shut the whole club down." "But everyone is touching," I said, pointing out the obvious. "You just need to know the rule," Sylvia said. "If someone tells you an undercover cop is here, or you see cops in uniform, stop touching immediately or you'll be arrested." At the mention of police, I thought of my mother, and I felt shame wash over me again. I quickly pushed the image out of my mind. I had to focus on how I was going to get out of this mess. Maybe it was a good thing that there could be police here, some protection. As if on cue, Adina pointed out a security guard in a far corner. If I ever had a problem with a client, she said, the security guard would quickly remove him. Okay, I thought, slightly comforted. This is nasty. This is disgusting, but it could be worse. I was with other Hungarian girls who seemed fine. Aside from the fact that they were wearing bikinis, they looked completely normal. Still, I wasn't ready to take the stage, nor was I convinced that it would be easy or that I would be safe. My reluctance must have been written all over my face, because the girls turned our conversation back to all the money they were making. "We know what it's like, Timea," one of them said. "We came from Hungary too. This is the only way to get out of debt." I wondered how long they'd been here, but there was no chance to ask, because Adina and Sylvia turned and began walking toward the door of the VIP room, back to the main club. I followed, but stopped in my tracks when I noticed a girl sitting on a guy in one of the booths, totally naked. She had her knees up around his hips and was dancing with her upper body. His hands were all over her. I was almost certain they were having sex. Sylvia glanced over her shoulder at me, and I didn't even need to ask the question. "Some girls are dirty girls," she explained, "and they can do whatever their customer asks if they want to make more money." "But what about the undercover cops?" I asked. "She's a Canadian girl, so she doesn't have to worry," Sylvia said. "They can give her a warning or a ticket or whatever, but she's a citizen. She can't get deported. We have to be more careful." "You can make a lot just giving hand jobs," Adina pointed out. She said the term in English, then gestured to what she meant. I almost gagged. Then she carefully pronounced the word towel, so I could add it to my necessary vocabulary. In my first 12 hours in Canada, I'd learned the words interrogation, motel, club, hand job, and towel. It's the easiest thing to do. It's super quick, and you can charge an extra $15 or $20. All you have to do is wash your hands after. Sylvia explained the details in such a nonchalant, matter-of-fact way that we could have been working in a cafe, and she was explaining how to make the coffee. "Just lay the towel on the guy in case he comes too soon," she went on, "and you can just clean him up when you're done." I was glad to leave the VIP room and head back to the main club, where Adina and Sylvia led me toward the stage. They stepped up onto it and started dancing around the perimeter while waiting for their names to be called and their songs to play. I stood awkwardly to the side, not having any idea what to do. I just watched. I heard names being called, all English names, and saw girls step up to the front of the stage. They danced to the first song, prowled like animals on the floor, or twisted themselves around poles for their second song, and stripped off their outfits slowly and provocatively during the third song. Once it was over, they left the stage and walked around the tables until they were called for lap dances or into the VIP room by men with green bills in their hands, which I soon learned were 20s. I saw Adina and Sylvia answer to English names and take their turns. This is what was expected of me. I went into survival mode, shutting off my emotions one by one as if they were breakers on an electrical panel. I sent the good girl I'd been when I arrived in Canada as far away as I could, so she didn't have to see any more of this disgusting underworld. The faces of all the people in my life flashed before me. My mom, my godparents, Zoli, Adam, people at the TV station. Each one I shut down and pushed out of my mind. If I couldn't picture them, they couldn't see me like this. Feelings of shame, guilt, disgust. I switched them all off. I shut down panic, I shut down pain, and I shut down fear until there was nothing. I felt more blood between my legs, so I calmly asked another girl for a towel and quickly wiped myself as though I'd spilled some coffee in the cafe where I was working. I wasn't here. This wasn't happening. Back at the motel, Timea got a sense of how the pay scale worked for these girls. Alec broke it down for a girl named Ilona. Now, you owe Tony $140 for his weekly manager's fee. You owe me $140 for my agent's fee, plus your accommodation and transport. And I also bought you some food, so that's $350 total. He scribbled some notes as she handed him the money. Okay, good job, he said. Now you keep $20 for your living allowance, give me $300 for Sasha's cut, and the rest goes toward your debt. She pulled a 20 from the wad and passed the rest over to him. He counted it, then subtracted the $130 from her debt to the agency. The fees were high, but I figured she must be pretty new and was still paying back her airfare. At this rate, it still shouldn't take too long. Alec turned to Adina and ran through the same basic accounting. She'd earned $860, but she had to pay $50 more because it was her turn to buy cigarettes for everyone. Plus, she'd used some little bottles of shampoo at the motel. They seemed pretty expensive, but what did I know? I also noticed in the bright light of the motel room that Adina was even younger than I'd thought, maybe 14, barely old enough to even be a babysitter, which must be what she had come to Canada for too. How had she gotten into this country? Did she have anyone at home worrying about her? Alec informed Timea that she could stay in Canada longer using an alias, and therefore a falsified work visa. He blackmailed her into staying to make back the money he told her she owed. Timea recounts this part of the story. To make sure you're okay back in Hungary, Alec continued, we're going to have someone there checking on you. Nothing to worry about. But one of our agents will be around your apartment and mother's house because we don't want to lose a good girl like you. Lose me? What did he mean? Before I could ask him, he carried on. And also, Timea, we need our money soon. If we don't get it, we won't be able to protect your brother. My brother? What did Zoli have to do with anything? And protect. I must be hallucinating. It sounded like I was in a mafia movie. What do you mean? I asked weakly. Well, Timea, in this kind of business, it's all about who you know and your connections and keeping people happy. Our boss, Sasha, the Ukrainian, isn't going to be too happy about all this. We owe him a lot of money because of you, and we can't give it to him until you earn it and pay us back. He paused and exhaled slowly before continuing. Unfortunately, Sasha is not an understanding guy. After all, this is his business, and he's at the top. I can't say what he'll do, but he will get his money any way he can, and he'll start by sending some agents to see your brother in Budapest. I had no words. My survival adrenaline drained away, and my panic switch flipped back on. I imagined my brother finding out about me and what I'd done, and then being asked for hundreds of dollars he would never have. I couldn't let my thoughts go any further. What might happen to him? Your brother still works at that grocery store, right? He asked casually, not waiting for an answer. I know that area well. It's pretty dark at night there. Not a lot of street lights from what I remember. Anything could happen on his walk home, Tamika. Timea's life at that point resembled that of a person who borrowed a juice loan from a mafioso. Timea flew back to Hungary. She assessed her situation and tried to figure out what to do next. She knew she didn't want to be a stripper and prostitute. Before a solution presented itself, Natasha came knocking. As Timea tells it, "Timea, we need to talk," she said. "You've been here for 4 days, and you haven't called me. You screwed up at the border, and now you have to go back to Canada and fulfill the terms of your contract. You weren't planning on running away, were you?" She sounded threatening. The man said nothing, but bored holes in me with his eyes. I stepped into the hallway and closed the door behind me so Zoli wouldn't hear anything. I wanted clarification and for Natasha to share the blame for the problem at the border. Why hadn't she been clearer about what I was supposed to say to the immigration officer? But I also wanted to confide in her. She was a woman. She would understand. And she should know what dancing really meant in Canada before she signed up any other girls to go there. She should also know what kind of work her boyfriend Alec was involved in. If I were her, I'd want to know. Most of all, I wanted Natasha to comfort me, to ease my disappointment over what I'd gotten myself into, and to apologize for not giving me better instructions. Then I wanted her to talk to the agents and get me a real babysitting job. "Natasha, something happened there. I'm really confused." She cut me off, her voice now slightly raised. "I don't care, Timea. You need to go back. You owe us a lot of money. I will find a way to get you to Canada, but right now you need to come with us." She was acting completely different from the caring human resources recruiter she'd been just a couple of weeks ago. "Get dressed," Natasha ordered. "Nicely. We're going to meet Bianca at the Canadian consulate because she wants to try again to get a work permit. So you're coming too." Bianca had changed her mind about going back to Sweden? That surprised me. I don't think that's a good idea. Surely our passports had been flagged. "Now," she said firmly, cutting me off. The tough guy cracked his knuckles. There was no point in arguing. My life and the lives of my family were in danger. I had to do whatever the agency told me to protect them. Timea, Natasha, and the tough guy who accompanied Natasha left together. Timea returned to Toronto with an alias and papers stating she was to spend 3 months working as a dancer. She was approved. After reuniting with Alec and his crew at the airport, she was taken to the motel. Once in the room, Tony from the club came. She described what happened next. Tony led me into my room, which was a different one than before, but looked identical. He motioned for me to put my bag down, and then for me to lie down on the bed, where he began taking off my jeans, touching me, and kissing me. I knew what was coming, so I instantly went into mannequin mode. I wasn't in my body when he entered me, and it was over very quickly. I remained numb as I put my jeans back on. He hadn't said a word the whole time, and I wouldn't have understood him if he had. The silence added to the feeling that I wasn't real, that I was just a body. You feel nothing, I told myself. No fear, no fear. You will be fine. Once at the club called Temptations, Timea was given an orientation. As she recalled, Sylvia and Adina led me to the change room where they went over the basics they taught me before, plus a few new tips. It was all very simple. I didn't have to put on makeup or fake nails or do anything sexy with my hair. The only thing they said was that we all had to keep tidy and shave our pubic hair. It was preferred by most clients. Adina gave me a pink plastic razor and sent me to the bathroom. Still feeling dizzy from the alcohol and emotionally shut down from my encounter with Tony, I shaved without thinking or feeling anything. When I was done, Sylvia had more instructions. Okay, Timea, this is for real now. I nodded in agreement. You get dressed and you get out there. You pick your songs and tell the DJ. We'll introduce you to him soon, when you're ready. And you get naked by the third song. If you don't want anyone to touch you, don't let them. If you don't want to touch anyone, don't touch them. Just remember, you'll make a lot more money with touching. It's up to you, Adina coached. You set the rules. Just make sure you always have a towel with you and that the guy is always covered, Sylvia added. There is no sex or we can get shut down. I thought back to the last time I was in the VIP room. I'd seen dancers breaking all these rules. Timea also found out she had to give the DJ a slice for paying her songs while she danced. And then there was the bartender and the servers. It would take her a long time to pay off her debts, with so many people to take care of. Expenses continued to pile up. Timea was told by Alec that she would have to pay for her use of motel towels, $10 for the small, $20 for the large. Also, she was pushed from just stripping to prostitution. As she recalls, we'd only just fallen asleep when there was a knock at the door. I crawled back out of bed and opened it, as Alec had instructed. 2 guys were standing there. I recognized one, an older, overweight man who I'd noticed talking to Alec in the club earlier that day. He introduced himself as Boris, a Serbian, exchanged a few words in English. Rika got up and sleepily came over to the door. She seemed to know the other man, and they exchanged a few words in English. Then he left, but Boris came in. Rika, I whispered. What's happening? What did you say? Nothing much, she said. I'm just going to go to sleep in another room tonight. Now I was completely confused as well as terrified. Why was she leaving me here with Boris? What am I supposed to do with this guy? I asked. Weren't we supposed to talk to them? I don't speak any English or Serbian. I was getting frustrated, but Rika ignored it. She was evasive and nonchalant, shrugging her shoulders and turning her hands palm up. Something had gotten into her. Just chill with him, she said, using an English word and waving her hand in his general direction as she headed out the door. What do you mean, chill with him? I asked, repeating the strange word. I had no idea what chill meant. Rika ignored me, and I watched her leave the room. I was so overwhelmed and sleepy that I just sat down on my bed and looked up at Boris. He sat down next to me and immediately began touching my face, my hair, and my shoulders. Then he began to take off my clothes. And then I knew. To be absolutely certain about what was coming, I looked him in the eyes, and I saw it. That look. A look I'd seen in Tony's eyes, in the eyes of the guy Bianca had set me up with in Budapest, And in the eyes of the guy in the TV studio long ago, it was the same look that's in an animal's eyes when it's just about to pounce on its prey, when it knows it's going to take what it has decided is theirs. I'd seen it on a few Discovery Channel programs when they came to Hungarian TV. The predator's pupils dilate, the irises go darker and become glassy. There is focus, yet absence at the same time. If you see this look, you know that you are done for. You are nothing but prey. If there was a way out of what was going to happen, I didn't know what it was. I was too exhausted to protest and too weak and scared to fight. Instead, I let him take off my underwear and I opened my legs. He climbed right on top and entered me. I turned my head to the side, closed my eyes, and breathed to get through the pain. I slipped away into my safe place in the shadowy corner of the room and waited for him to finish. A few minutes later, it was over. He got dressed, kissed me goodbye, which was almost the most disgusting part of the encounter because it made it seem as though there was affection or intimacy between us, and left. I lay there, my body numb, but my mind racing. Who was he? Why did Alex send him? Was he one of our so-called protectors? The last thing I felt was protected. I felt violated, but like with Tony, it didn't seem like rape. I wondered if Tony knew about this. What about Alec? He had told me to have a good time with the guys. Was this what he meant? And was doing this part of my job? Everything that I'd understood about sex, crime, violence, and relationships before moving to Canada was all mixed up. I didn't seem to know anything for certain anymore. One thing I could count on was the fact that in a few hours I had to be downstairs in the lobby with the other girls, ready to face another long day of dancing and make as much money as I could. The only other thing that was clear to me was that I desperately needed to shower. I felt very, very dirty. I was fierce and unstoppable, scrubbing myself until my skin was almost bleeding. I cried tears of fear and anger, gasping to get my breath. Get a hold of yourself, Timea. Stop being a drama queen. This is not that big a deal. Just wash everything and you'll be okay. Tough love was all I had to offer myself. In the car, Alec told me that Boris liked me. Jamaica, Boris likes good girls, and if you're nice to him, he can take you out shopping sometimes. I didn't respond. All I could think about was how dirty I still felt. I wished I could peel the skin off my entire body. There were other revolting experiences to come. To quote Timea, the club's no-touching rule never stopped the men from trying. In fact, it only encouraged them. We had to dance and do sexy moves while batting away the hands that grabbed us, like we were goods for sale in a market. There were a few security guards around, but not enough to manage the crowd completely, and they weren't really motivated to keep us safe. What they wanted, just like everyone else, was for the club to make money and not get busted. One client took a particular liking to me and had me dance 4 songs in a row for him at his table. He sat in his chair watching me while drinking a beer and eating chicken wings, pants undone. He was middle-aged, overweight, and generally unattractive. He was also strong. He pulled me toward him, forcing me down on his lap while he pulled out his penis. No touching, I insisted. But he wasn't listening at all. Instead, within moments, he ejaculated all over me. It was disgusting. The wet feeling and the smell. I jumped up and ran to the bathroom where I wiped myself off with water and toilet paper and willed myself not to be sick or to cry. I sat on the toilet for several minutes, just trying to get my breath and figure out what to do next. One day, Alec proposed a shopping trip to the mall Sherway Gardens so they could purchase beauty and hygiene products. Timea opted out, being so tired after sleeping little more than 5 hours each night and working as long as 16 hours a day in stiletto heels. Boris came by to pay her a visit, but much to her relief, he fell asleep in the other bed. Tony also decided to stop by. Timea described how this went down. No sooner had I closed my eyes and relaxed than I heard the door open again. This time it was Tony. I felt my body tense with fear, but I kept my eyes shut, pretending to be asleep. He wasn't supposed to come until later. He called my name softly, and when I ignored him, he walked over to my bed and said my name again. I lifted my head a little, mumbled a hello, and then put prayer hands under my cheek, tipping my head to show that I needed to sleep. He shook his head and held out a coffee and a box of donuts. I shook my head no, but he insisted, making me sit up and putting the coffee in my hand. I took a sip. He put the donuts down and then took my other hand and put it on the crotch of his pants, guiding me to rub him. He ran his hands over my hair and face, and then he took the coffee from my hand and put it on the bedside table. He undid his belt, unzipped his pants, and put my hand inside. Without missing a beat, he pushed me back to lying down, rolled me over onto my back, and climbed on top of me. Rubbing up against me, he began to breathe heavily. He kissed me, and I could feel him getting aroused. His belt buckle jabbed into my hip, so I focused on that pain to distract me from what I knew was going to happen next. Then I tried to slip away in my mind to my safe place in the shadows of the room. It was hard to breathe. His heavy frame pressed the air out of my lungs. He was more than double my size. I was utterly helpless. Suddenly I felt something vibrate, the pager on his belt. He stopped what he was doing, wiped the sweat from his brow, and reached down to his belt to look at the number. "I'm sorry," he said, and kissed me on the forehead. I couldn't believe it. Sorry. It was an English word I'd learned. He clearly thought I was his girlfriend, and that I wanted this. What had I done to send that message? I thought back to the first time this happened, back in his office at the club only hours after I'd arrived in Canada. I should have made it clear then, but I was in shock. It had all happened so fast. This was all my fault. How was I going to get out of this? Did I have to break up with him? And what on earth was going on with Boris? Had he slept through all of this? Had he watched? Or did he just not care? Is this how relationships were in Canada? Older men shared younger women? Was Boris going to take another turn with me? I had so many questions and could make sense of nothing. Tony did his pants and belt back up, kissed me again, and left. I immediately got out of bed and headed for the bathroom. Boris sat up in the other bed. He looked at me and mumbled a greeting. I motioned that I was going to take a shower. I closed the bathroom door behind me, grabbed another $10 hand towel off the rack, placed it on the counter, undressed, and stepped in. Less than 2 minutes later, Boris was in the shower with me. It was just like before, and just like Tony. Hands all over me, taking my hand and showing me what to do. He was gentle, but I didn't want any of it. I said no, but in my exhaustion, it came out as a very weak protest. It wouldn't have mattered anyway. My body wasn't my own anymore. As Boris took me over to the bed, I could see that he was now fully aroused. I let his body become Allison's, the bad girl, then just a mannequin. I lay still and tried to relax my muscles as he entered me. I reminded myself not to feel anything. That's the only way I was going to be okay. Soon it was over. Boris kissed me, lit a cigarette, and took a sip of his lukewarm coffee. He grabbed a donut from the box Tony had left on the bedside table and offered me one. Although I was certainly hungry, I had no appetite. I took a small bite and tried to let the sugar replace the taste of him and of Tony, but it almost made me sick. I got my t-shirt from the bathroom and put it on, along with a pair of underwear, and then went over to my bed and lay down, pulling the covers over me. Boris got dressed, made a few phone calls, and turned the TV on to watch sports. He lay back down next to me on the bed like a king, remote control in hand, and shirt unbuttoned to reveal his hairy chest and fat stomach. I felt flattened, used. I closed my eyes and tried to sleep, but I couldn't. Timea detailed the way this lifestyle was impacting her body. I'd never experienced such sleep deprivation, let alone starvation or physical labor. My body was sore from dancing all the time, especially my feet and knees, and my hands and inner thighs had blisters from pole dancing. Then there was my vagina, which hurt from all the unwanted invasions. Maybe Rika was going through the same thing. Timea wasn't exactly living the most healthy lifestyle as a stripper, as she noted. I had so much adrenaline that it often kept me awake through the few hours we were allowed to sleep each night, or rather each morning. It made my body burn quickly through the calories in the one meal a day I was given, plus many more. I didn't have a scale to weigh myself, but I knew I was losing weight rapidly. The girls who weren't as skinny were the ones who got themselves into the VIP room frequently. They made more money, so they got a bit more food, and the clients they were with sometimes bought them snacks or meals. As hungry as I was, I didn't want that to be me. I kept focusing on dancing and began earning a few $100s per day. Even more blackmail factored into this situation. Yosef and Alec told stories of punishing recalcitrant girls with inflictions of violence, like dousing them with boiling oil and hitting them with a baseball bat. The story about the girl who had hot oil foisted on her sounded like fiction, like the part about her trying to escape that life by fleeing on foot stark naked. But the implication was that the threat was very real for any girl who dared to defy them. A new girl, Hannah, had concerns that she shared with Timea. She knew something was rotten in Denmark, or Canada. She said, "I worked in Germany and other countries as a professional prostitute, and this is not right. This is not how it works. These guys are robbing us blind. This is illegal." Timea didn't want to believe she was taken in by such a situation. She even still believed that Alec would never impose such a situation on the girls. He was also talking about how he had done so much for the girls, and they were so ungrateful. Meanwhile, he charged interest on their debts and made them pay for such things as car repairs. With so much expenses and fees, it was a struggle for the girls to pay off their debts to his operation. Without servicing the VIP room at the club, it would be hard for Timea. One day on the way to a club, Alec delved into the subject of what to do when a girl becomes difficult to deal with. His driver, Caroli, said, "There's always the baseball bat. You know the best way to use it, right? Just hit them in the back of the head first, then on the back, then the back of the knees, and they will collapse. Then you just beat them a couple of times, and then, well, your problems are over." One day Alec was angry at Rika. She was smoking pot in a club. She told him a client gave it to her, so she didn't spend any of his money on it. She felt Alec was upset that she spent the money she owed him on the weed. This did not allay his rage, and he became even more menacing in his threats. Case in point, do you know how easily I could just put your black and blue body in a garbage bag and throw you in the lake? No one will ever find you. Alec became fed up with Rika and Hannah's behavior and reported later that they were no longer breathing. Timea was forced into work at a massage parlor, where the real money came not from merely giving massages, but from so-called happy endings and more. She recounted one harrowing experience, which also included Sandra, who instructed her on how to operate at this business. 3 young Russian guys, probably 16 or 17 years old, walked in. "You want to take them?" Sandra asked. "Not really, no," I said. "Security is watching in the back," she said quietly, motioning toward one of the cameras. "You better. They report to Alec and Janos." I hesitated. "You have to take them," she insisted. "It's your turn." "All of them?" "Kids like this pool their money. It's a group rate." "What do I do with them?" I asked, feeling pressured. The guys were already looking at their watches. "Just take it easy. Make them take showers. Take your top off. Dance a little, like at the club. You'll be fine. They probably only have enough money for hand jobs anyway. Make them show you the money first. 3 hand jobs will be $60. I listened to the instructions and then tried to snap into being Allison, but I couldn't do it. My surroundings were new, I was wearing my own t-shirt and jeans, and everything was happening so fast. I was Timea, and I was frightened, but I let Sandra lead me and the boys to the door of one of the rooms. I went in first. There was a massage table in the middle and a shower stall in one corner. Some towels were on a rack next to it. There was no other decor whatsoever save for a wall calendar featuring a picture of a topless girl. We all crowded into the room and one of the guys locked the door behind us. "Okay, guys, here's the shower," I said, with nervous cheer in my grade school Russian. I opened the door to the shower stall and waited for one of them to get in. Instead, one of the boys pushed me in, and all 3 of them began tearing off my clothes like I was a new toy on Christmas morning. I didn't even have time to try and stop them. Then they turned the water on and told me to take a shower, a sexy shower. I ran my hands over my breasts and butt, hoping it would be enough for them. They watched and laughed as they undid their belts. I glanced up to the ceiling corner to see if there were any video cameras. There weren't. No one was watching me. No one was protecting me. These guys could do whatever they wanted. After a couple of minutes, they turned off the water, pulled me out of the shower, and pushed me onto the massage table. They each took their pants off and rolled on a condom, and I was momentarily relieved. I already feared getting pregnant from Tony or Boris, and the more men I was exposed to, the more I knew I was at risk for all kinds of nasty stuff. They took turns touching me, squeezing my breasts, fingering me, getting turned on. I froze and didn't fight, but I couldn't seem to slip away to my safe place like I could with Tony or Boris. As I lay on the cold massage table and stared up at the ceiling, I'd willed myself not to cry, not to scream. Just do what Sandra said. Lie down, open my legs, let them do their thing, and hope it would be over quickly. One of the boys climbed on top and roughly entered me, while another grabbed my hair, and the third forcefully rubbed my breasts. I felt cold and exposed. There was absolutely no way I could even attempt to protect or cover myself. I was utterly vulnerable and helpless. The first boy finished, and the second jumped on. He was rougher than his friend, and it hurt. I was dry, and my muscles were tense. Okay, Timea, it's okay. I began to console myself. It's just your body. It's not what's inside you. No one is here. No one can see what's happening. It's okay. It will be over soon. After the third boy took his turn, it was finally over. I looked at the clock. It had all taken close to 45 minutes. The boys, happy and laughing, thanked me for a good time, placed a stack of bills on the massage table near my feet, and left. I wondered if it was their first time with a girl. As soon as they left, I reached for a towel and sat up on the table. Then I carefully stood and stepped back into the shower, where I scrubbed myself under hot water. Timea begged Sandra not to make her service any other clients in that way again that day. Due to her inexperience, Sandra took mercy on her. Though Alec also accepted that Timea wasn't ready for full-out prostitution, he also warned her of consequences for not making more money. Timea began working at a new club called Fantasia. It was a better club, and she made much better money, though she got robbed of most of it during her first shift. Alec threatened Timea that he would harm her and her family, even kill them if such a thing happened again. Janos was driving them and blackmailed Timea with violence if she was lying so she could keep the money. And that concludes part 1 of Timea Nagy's tale of being a victim of human trafficking. Thank you for listening to Human Monsters. Bye for now.